Mr. and Mrs. North and South American, all the ships at sea, let's go to
The Bitchspot Report. Welcome to the Bitchspot Report, the podcast with news and views from a distinctly conservative atheist perspective, with your hosts, Cephas and Out West. We hope we can entertain, educate, perhaps even enrage you. Now let's begin this episode of the Bitchspot Report. Hi, welcome to the second episode of the Bitchspot Report, the podcast where atheism and conservatism collide. I'm one half of your hosting team, Cephas, and Out West will be along in just a moment. I wanted to thank everyone who has listened so far and encourage you all to visit our website at report.jdragononline.com. We'll also shortly be on iTunes, and there will be a link in the show notes as soon as that happens. Please subscribe there and give us a review. We appreciate it. And now, on with the show.
And now for the news. And now, your weekly Bitchspot news. We try to discover news we hope you'll find interesting, thought-provoking, and occasionally amusing. Our first story comes from actually all over.
A judge in Iran sentenced an American pastor, Saeed Abedini, to 8 years in prison for violating Iranian religious law that forbids Muslims from converting to any other religion. Abedini, no stranger to this law, has been looked at by Iranian authorities before for organizing Christian home churches in Iran. However, lots of people outside of Iran are pissed off. They seem to think that freedom of religion is a, air quotes, universal right that anybody ought to have, regardless of the laws of the nation in which they reside or visit. What do you think?
I think that's completely bogus. This person, from what I've read about it, he's been over there before. He knew what the laws were. He went over again.
Well, you have to remember, he was born in Iran. He grew up there.
Yes, but he's now
and then he moved to the U.S.
But now he's a naturalized citizen as of the year 2000 or 2001.
Yeah, something like that.
And so everybody's saying, oh, poor him, poor Christian pastor. Well, he knew what kind of a place he was going to do that. And although I feel sympathy for him and his family, of course I do. I cannot believe that he did not go over there knowing ahead of time what chance he was going to take. Just an opinion.
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to remember that he knew the problem. You know, he knew what the laws were. He knew what risk he was running. And it's not like there aren't Christians in Iran, but they know enough to keep their head down and keep quiet about it. You know, keep it to the privacy of their own homes. He didn't. He went out and made it publicly known that not only was he a Christian, he was encouraging other Muslims to convert to Christianity. And then he sits there and goes, "Wah, poor me,
and that's clearly against the law over there. You know, that's all part of a segment we'll get into later about Sharia Law, about how they absolutely encourage all other religions to convert to Islam, but converting from Islam to any other religion is blasphemy.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the actual law is a sentence of death. And he's sitting around whining about 8 years. Dude, count yourself lucky, and people should learn from this.
And he probably won't actually have to do 8 years. I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure he won't.
He might do some time, and then, Ahmadinejad will make some big, or whoever, Khamenei will make some big gesture and let him return to the U.S. Just like they did those people that they caught on the wrong side of the Iraq-Iran border, that they threw into prison, Christian missionaries a few years ago.
Right.
And I think those people were, I'm sure it wasn't a pleasant experience for them, but...
These were people who were trying to smuggle Bibles into Iran. Let's be honest.
Yes, and they were clearly breaking the law. So, when you go to the Middle East, I've been there, I don't know if you have, but I've been there, you are told there are certain things you can, certain countries in the Middle East that you can and cannot do. And you're clearly told this. And if you choose to ignore it, you ignore it at your own peril. And the State Department is not going to do a heck of a lot for you, especially when you've been told this is what you can and cannot do. Just end of story.
Right. Well, the thing that I take out of this is you get a lot of people in the U.S. and a lot of people outside of Iran who actually have the laws, and they act like everybody on the planet has these universal rights that they can't demonstrate that anybody actually has. They say, well, no, the U.S. should go in and use political, military, and economic strength to push everybody else to accept these rights universally. UN does the same thing. The fact is, a right is just what a society chooses to provide to its members.
I agree.
It's not something that just magically exists floating around out there in the ether that everybody has, whether they like it or not.
No, I totally agree. It's not universal. They are, the rights that we have as Americans in the United States are those rights that were fought for and, developed over time. They are enshrined in our Constitution. And they weren't initially enshrined in our Constitution, as everybody knows or should know from their history, high school history at least, is that, the first 10 amendments didn't come until later, after the Constitution was ratified. So those are things, though, that we fought for and that we, as a society, as you said, believe in. And, yes, it would be wonderful if all of these other countries had the same privileges that we do, but they don't. And that's due to their cultural differences, religious differences,
social differences.
And social differences. Yes.
I mean, the U.S. does not have the same rights as Canada. And we're pretty damn close as far as societies are concerned. It's just things that we've decided that we want versus things that they've decided they want.
And that's true. Let's look at their British and Canadian libel laws, for instance. You can get sued for telling the truth about somebody if they don't like it.
Right.
You can be charged in Canada with a hate crime by saying Muslim extremists are bad people, because they actually have a board up there that does that, that will take complaints. Well, that would never happen in the United States, thankfully. People may try and sue, but everybody has a right to free speech, and even if it's hate speech, something that you don't like, that person still has the right to say it. They don't have the right to incite anybody to violence, but they have a right to say what they believe. And that's the difference. And these are, like you said, Canada's right next door. You certainly couldn't go to Mexico and even be close to the kind of rights and privileges that we have here in the United States. I know that for a fact.
Absolutely.
All right, and now for our next story. I actually read about it last week before the Super Bowl on a site called hotair.com, kind of one of those right-wing news sites out on the web. And this has to do with some perceived outrage over a Volkswagen commercial that was produced for the Super Bowl that was out on YouTube. Now, in this commercial, there is obviously big white guy in an office with a fake Jamaican accent telling people in his office to be happy and to basically be chill. And this has gotten a lot of, manufactured, I guess I would say, outrage, at least some, enough to where it became a story. And, of course, VW is saying, hey, we're going on with the ad and we don't really care what anybody else thinks about it, because it is a kind of an amusing ad, and it has a different take. And, of course, as everybody knows, people, advertisers try and do something during the Super Bowl to grab your attention, because they're paying $3 and $4 million for, 30 seconds or a minute. So, anyway, what was really interesting to me in this story was it has raised ire in some groups. Now, these groups I've never heard about before. They're not your usual suspects like the NAACP or anybody else like that. Some mainstream groups that most people have heard about. A quote here from someone named Ricky Fairley Brown, president of the multicultural marketing agency, Dove Marketing, states that it's pretty horrific. Why do they have a white guy from Minnesota faking a Jamaican accent?
Did you say this guy's name was Ricky Fairley Brown?
The person, Ricky, R-I-C-K-I, Ricky Fairley, F-A-I-R-L-E-Y -Brown.
Yeah, well, he's fairly brown, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe better than being fairly purple.
Yeah, but who are these people? And that's what's really interesting to me. Why do they have a white guy from Minnesota in the ad? Somebody asked him, why are you doing that accent? You're from Minnesota. Doing a fake Jamaican accent. And even more troubled by the spot was another person, Rochelle Newman Carrasco, Chief Hispanic Marketing Strategist at Walton Isaacson, an African-American, gay, lesbian, and Hispanic agency. What happens in this ad is that the culture becomes a punchline. This is a quote. And that is offensive. Now, somebody else that, yes, Cephas, you might have heard about. I don't know this person either. But there's somebody named Barbara Lippert, okay, and she's quoted as being a pop cultural guru.
Yeah, I know who she is.
Okay, I've never heard of her before. And she says, it made me uncomfortable that all those white people in an office setting doing this, she says. Quote, I found it offensive. But hey, guess what? The Jamaican Cultural and Tourism Director takes an opposite point of view. We view it as a compliment. People should get into their inner Jamaica and get happy. And he's even negotiating with VW for some sort of co-branding. What do you think about all this? Manufactured outrage?
Oh, of course it is. I mean, my first response to this is, all right, exactly how is this racist? All right, let's imagine for a moment, let's throw out the whole guy in Minnesota thing, because let's be honest, he's an actor, and that really doesn't matter. But let's imagine that there's a white guy who was born in Jamaica, who grew up there, and he has this accent. Is this somehow racist because a white guy has this accent? That's absurd.
I agree, because I didn't include this in the story, but of course on the YouTube channel, you have comments on YouTube channels, of course, and they produced 2 or 3 or 4 comments from people who claimed to be Jamaican that didn't find it offensive whatsoever. Yeah. So why is it that some group or groups in the United States, okay, are deciding for the Jamaican people what is offensive and what's not offensive?
Well, there's really two options here. All right, and the people that you quoted, there's pretty much one for each of these options. The first option is these are white people who are being offended by proxy. They're being offended for somebody else, even if the other people aren't offended, because they think these people should be offended, which is stupid. The other part are black and, as you said, for that one group, the black, Hispanic, gay, lesbian, whatever group, they're looking for something to bitch about. They only get attention if they can have something in the news. So they go running around looking for something to get pissed off about.
And here's what I wonder. I wonder if this news agency that originally reported this, and again, this is just quoted in a blog in Hot Air called hotair.com.
I think you have it right there, yeah.
Yeah. Surely you would think that they would have gone to the NAACP and asked what they thought, or some of the well-known names in this country. And they didn't. All they could find were this Dove marketing group. I've never heard of them, and the Walter Isaacson group. So Again, manufactured outrage, trying to stir up a controversy where there is none. And actually what I'm really wondering, and we'll move on after this, but as a final question, I really wonder how that ad did. I don't watch the Super Bowl, but I'm just kind of wondering how that ad did with people that saw it on Super Bowl Sunday.
Well, I think the reason that they went to those groups is because those are the only 2 groups who gave them the kind of reaction that they wanted. They were out after a certain reaction. I'm sure they talked to the NAACP and a bunch of other groups, and the other groups said, "What? Stop making a mountain out of a molehill. There's nothing wrong here." So they just kept going with more and more and more obscure groups until they found ones that said the things that they wanted to report on.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I completely agree. And now for our final story.
The Boy Scouts of America have long been criticized for their stance on the non-religious and homosexuals, banning both groups from participating. This, of course, has led to an outcry, both from the gay community and the atheist community, that the BSA is outrightly discriminatory. Personally, I wouldn't have much of a problem with it. After all, the BSA is a private organization, and they can discriminate if they choose. But they do receive a lot of preferential treatment from the government. They get free advertising, cheap and free rentals in state and federal parks to hold their jamborees. They get unprecedented access to things that, let's be honest, other groups simply do not get. However, now it looks like many of the supporters of the BSA, which have traditionally agreed with their discriminatory views, are now changing their tune and suggesting it might be time for the Boy Scouts to embrace both homosexual and gay scouts in their organizations. What do you think?
I think it's about time. I agree that they are a private organization, but yes, they do get special treatment, and they get millions and millions of dollars from corporations that do not espouse the same belief. There's lots of companies that they regularly get money from their charitable PACs or whatever they call them that allow homosexuals benefits, partner benefits, things like that, and so those companies. Corporations, actually, I should say, are coming under pressure, and they should rightly be for supporting that. But what was really interesting to me was that today was the day that they were supposed to make that decision, the Boy Scouts of America, the board, on allowing individual units to decide whether or not they would have gay leaders or gay scouts. And they have put off that decision. I just read that today.
Right, yeah, I heard that.
And why do you think they did that?
Well, the problem is that they actually do have two competing sides. You've got sponsors like Bank of America, Intel, UPS, U.S. Bank, Verizon, Wells Fargo, among others, who are saying, we're not going to give you any more money if you don't change your ways. On the other side, you've got a lot of Christian organizations like the Baptists, etc., who are saying, well, no, you guys have to drop all these sponsors, get rid of them, and even if that means you have to downsize the Boy Scouts, you have to, maintain your standard. They really aren't sure which way they should go. And I think that's why they're putting this off, to see how things play out.
Well, I think it's basically they're riding the fence. And by their initial proposed decision, I think that was kind of riding the fence. Because I think in certain parts of the country, I'm not going to say the South or the West or the East or the North, whatever, but there's going to be certain parts of the country that are going to stay with the status quo, and others that are not, depending on where these units, scouting units, are. I think they should have come out and made a decision and said it's okay, and that's the decision I think they should have made. It's yes, we are 100% behind this, and you know what? If they lose the support of the Southern Baptists, I think another group is the Mormons, actually. Isn't it?
Right, yes.
Then who cares? I'm sure that they would end up with a lot more corporate sponsorships that have either dropped out or have never even considered corporate sponsorship with them if they have got off the fence.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the corporate sponsors that are saying you have to end this practice are not going to be happy with saying, well, each individual troop gets to decide on their own. They want direction from the head of the Boy Scouts that says, this is either gays are accepted across the board or atheists are accepted across the board, or they're not. They don't want individual troops to have their say.
And I agree with that. I think that's exactly what the national organization should do, is come out and say, this is what we are doing. We are saying that's okay, that's good to have gay leaders and gay scout members, and that no scout troop under the auspices of the Boy Scouts of America may discriminate based on sexuality.
Yeah, but then you're going to get all of the religious groups who are saying, well, we're just going to leave the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts is going to go from a giant national group down to a much, much smaller regional organization.
But again, I come back and argue, like I did, is that I think that if they came out and said that they have lost sponsors in the last 10 years, since that Supreme Court decision, 10, 12 years.
Right.
And that they would get those sponsors back, I believe, and also that they might garner new sponsorships to make up for the difference. It's a risk. And what they're doing by sitting on the fence that's what they're doing. They're taking a huge risk by just sitting on the fence. They're gonna piss off both groups. So they're going to lose more by doing this, where individual troops, can make up their own rules. They're going to lose more corporate sponsorships, and because some troops won't allow gays to be part of their troop as leaders or members, and some will. And so they'll lose some on the religious side, and they'll lose more corporate sponsorships, and they'll become smaller anyway.
Right.
So just get off the fence and say, this is a 100-year-old rule, more than 100 years, and it's time to change it.
Yeah, because one way, right now, they're pissing off both groups. When they make a decision, they're going to piss off one group. They need to decide which group is more important to them. If the religious want to go off and create the Jesus Scouts, let them. I could care less. They're going to, in the long run, they're going to be better off by just dealing with the reality instead of dealing with the religious fantasy that's been going on for 100 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree. It's been, I think, 1907 in the United States, Boy Scouts of America. So 106 years, I think.
Something like that.
Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Somebody out there listening can correct me. But yeah, I really think they need to make up their mind and get on with it and decide. And putting it off does nothing to help them. Sitting on the fence never does anything to help you out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's time. Get shit or get off the pot, guys. It's about time.
And that's it. That's really it.
That's it. All right, let's go ahead and move on.
This is the main event.
And now we have the main event. This is something that has been out there, especially for years and years, but especially since the recent Sandy Hook tragedy in Connecticut. Guns and gun control is what we're going to be talking about today, folks. Everybody has an opinion on it. And I guarantee you, not every conservative thinks the same way, and not every liberal, and again, those are just labels, but not every liberal-minded person thinks the same way, and not every conservative-minded person thinks the same way. And probably Cephas and I might have different opinions on how gun control, if anything, should be implemented. So I'll turn it over to you, Cephas, and let you start off.
All right. Well, we are all aware that Obama let Biden kind of go crazy and come up with a guideline for how we should stop this gun violence. The problem is none of the things he suggests actually are going to stop anything. It's just a bunch of word games and it's just a bunch of hand-waving. It's not going to actually solve the problems. The problem is they want to ban or they want to reinstate the ban on assault weapons. Well, they can't really define what an assault weapon is. And they can't demonstrate that actually banning assault weapons will actually stop school shootings. The vast majority of school shootings out there are not done with assault weapons. They're done with semi-automatic handguns, which are not covered by this ban.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually, we have a link on the podcast page, and this information that Cephas just mentioned comes actually from the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, from the federal government. It says that most of these shootings are with semi-automatic handguns. And yeah, and not with the quote-unquote, they're really semi-automatic rifles.
Right.
That have a large capacity, potentially a large capacity magazine with them. And so we tried this in 94. There was a law passed in Congress that expired in 2004, and it was a ban on importation and sale of assault weapons. Now, it didn't include, just like I think the current proposal doesn't include, taking away your assault rifle. You know, that the government's going to come to your house and take away your assault rifle. It was just that, nope, you're not going to be able to manufacture or import any of these weapons.
Well, not quite. It
Okay.
just means you are not going to be able to legally manufacture or legally import these weapons. Let's be honest. The criminals are not going to be following the law. If they want to be smuggling guns across the border from Mexico, like we are right now, by the way. Actually, we're actually smuggling guns into Mexico. But if they want to smuggle them across the border from Mexico, they're going to do it. They're going to steal guns. They're going to buy them on the black market. They're going to borrow them. None of these things are going to stop the violence. That's the problem.
No, it's not. And what I was getting at was just the legal, and because they did this again, it was a 10-year ban. It expired in 2004. It came in 94 under President Clinton, and it expired under George W. Bush. And let me think, during that time, yeah, there were some other school shootings, weren't there?
There were plenty.
I remember one because I just lived a few miles south of there in 1999. It was called Columbine, where these two high school kids had semi-automatic pistols, and they actually built pipe bombs, which luckily they never set off any, but, and they killed 13 people. And that was during the assault weapons ban.
Right, and the weapons that they used were legally obtained.
Yes.
That ban had no impact whatsoever on that assault. And that's true across the board. All the assault weapon bans you put out there. And in fact, I had a link. I'll actually throw it into the show notes. I'm not sure if it's there yet or not. But there's actually a link that shows that the countries that have banned assault weapons, that have the most restrictive gun bans, are also the ones that have some of the highest gun violence. These bans don't stop anybody.
Yeah, they do. They don't. I agree. I found an article, and it's kind of old. It's a little over about 3 years old, from when Great Britain banned ownership of any weapons, with maybe some hunting weapons, but they were very, very restricted on that, to own a shotgun, or a hunting rifle. And that in the time that they had banned, up until 2009, that gun violence by criminals, of course, who have the guns, doubled in their country.
Right.
Now, of course, I caught a lot of crap about that from people online when I was discussing it, because they said, well, that's 3 years old, and that doesn't, that's the latest information I could find. And there may be other, there could be better statistics out there, but it just goes to show you that during the time that they did this, which was in the 90s, I think it was 97 or 98 when they did that, 1997 or 98,
right, until
2009, gun deaths doubled.
Yeah, well, no, the most interesting thing about that story is between those years when they had that study, every single solitary one of those years, gun deaths were higher than any point in time before they passed the ban.
Yes.
The gun deaths went up every year.
Yeah, and again, in this country, in the United States, we have, depending on who you listen to, over 300 million guns, okay? Now, in Australia, I know that the government, of course, Australia has a much, much smaller population than the United States, and I think they already had restrictions to begin with. But they did, in the late 90s or early 2000s, actually a gun buyback, okay? And if you and I both chat with people from Australia online,
right,
and they will say that their gun violence, of course, is minimal. But again, they have a much, much smaller population. And I think that and I haven't looked this up, I should have for this show, but I think if you put it on probably a per capita basis, I don't know. It's not zero, put it that way. It's not zero in Australia.
Well, no, and the problem with Australia, and I've pointed this out before, it's not just a different basis, it's not just the number of guns that they have. It's how spread out their population is.
That's true. It's a huge continent and a very small population that's spread out.
Right, and if you look at gun violence in the U.S., you end up having, where you have the most gun violence is where you have people concentrated, where you have people every square foot or, whatever. And, of course, you're going to get more violence at that point in time.
Well, let's look at one of the articles we have linked. Chicago for the month of January. 42 deaths by gun violence. That's one city. Now, admittedly, it's a fairly large city, but again, like you said, it's based on population, and it's mainly criminals. But then there are also innocent people that are getting caught, just like that young girl. I can't remember her name right now. This was just in the news in the last week or so, a couple of weeks, who was at President Obama's inauguration, who was let out of school early for some reason, went to a park, and somehow got caught in the middle of gun violence between some gangsters and was killed.
Yeah.
And Chicago used to have, and I think still does have, some of the most stringent gun ownership ordinances out there, even though they were overturned. A lot of their really oppressive ones were overturned by the Supreme Court, but they were still able to limit the number of buys that you could have, gun buys and magazine size, things like that. Well, again, like you said, it doesn't affect criminals. They don't care about that.
Right.
They're going to get what they want.
If they were going to follow the laws, they wouldn't be criminals.
Exactly. And again, that's just shocking. That's 1 month. 42. And, of course, their mayor, Rahm Emanuel, who used to be the chief of staff for President Obama, is making all kinds of excuses about it, but it doesn't negate the point. You had 42 people killed in your city alone.
Yep.
And that made the national news and made headlines. And so what are you going to do about it? Mayor Emanuel, are you going to ban all guns? Well, okay, now you're going to have more innocent people killed.
Because the criminals are all still going to have them.
Exactly. And they're going to fight it out.
Yep.
Now, where I come into an area, and I live in one of the most liberal states in the country as far as gun ownership. I live in Arizona, okay? You can carry concealed out here without any training, without anything. You can just go down, buy a pistol, stick it in your pants, pull your shirt out, cover it over, and you can walk around concealed without having any license to do so, without having to have any training. And where I differ with some of my conservative friends and gun rights friends is that I think that if you're going to do that, I don't have a problem with that necessarily. In fact, I actually went to training. I actually have a concealed carry permit from Arizona. And then the year after I got that is when they changed the law that said you didn't have to do that. It's basically one-day training.
Right.
Where they talk about law, what you can't do, in this specific state. Every state's different to some degree. And then they actually take you to a range and make you qualify with you bring your own pistol and qualify. And I think that's a good idea.
Oh, so do I.
And because there's a lot of people out there, and that's one of the things that scares me, is there's people out there that are probably in my state, and I know for a fact in my town, that are out there carrying concealed that just went out and bought their 9mm or their Glock 40 or whatever, and are carrying it around, and they have no idea of how to use it. And the most important part for me is in that training was the law. And one of the people that taught the class was a retired Tucson police officer. And one of the things he told us was, if you're involved in a shooting and you're carrying legally and you shoot somebody else and you wound them or kill them, when the police come, even if there's a dozen witnesses out there that say that person started shooting at you, you're going to go to jail.
Yep.
Because they have to sort it out. And in Arizona, he said, that could be up to 10 days before they decide whether the district attorney is going to file charges against you or not, till they investigate. And that could take 10 days. So you're going to go to jail, be sitting in jail for 10 days, possibly. And I thought, that's interesting. And even more than that. But his advice was, if you can walk away. He said there's going to be circumstances where you can't because somebody is threatening your life or one of your loved ones' lives. But if you can, walk away.
Of course. But I think any rational person is going to do that. Nobody is going to go buy a gun, stick it in their pants, and go, well, I'm out looking for somebody who's causing trouble so I can pull out a gun and shoot him. Only idiots do that.
And there are idiots out there.
There are idiots. You get, and I hate to turn this into a liberal conservative thing, but there are liberals who think that that's what every single gun owner and every single person who carries a gun wants to do, is they're out looking to be a cowboy. That's not the reality.
No, it's not. It's not the reality at all. I'll just say up front, I rarely, in fact, I never carry around town. I live in a small town. There's no reason to. If I'm on the road, making a road trip somewhere, a couple hours away or more, I might have a pistol in my vehicle, okay? And I say might, if I remember to, because I don't personally feel that unsafe anywhere I go. But I think it's my right and my privilege, no privilege involved here, my right to carry if I want to. If I feel I have the need to do so, then I should be able to do so.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I used to own a lot of firearms. Way back when. I used to have them, because I never really had any use for them. My grandfather and I used to go out and shoot from time to time, and friends and I used to go out and shoot from time to time, but we never really used them, so they were stored at his house. And when he died, everybody said, well, nobody wants the guns, go ahead and sell them. And since I hadn't even touched one of them in probably over a decade, I said, okay, great, I'll sell mine as well, and we just got rid of them all. To be real honest, if you come into my house and try to do me harm, I do not have a gun in this house. But I will tell you what I do have on the wall. I have a couple of really sharp swords, and you better fear me a lot more with those swords than you would with a gun, because I'll take off anything you got. I'll cause you more damage with those swords or with any of the other martial arts weapons that I have at hand than anything I could ever do with a gun. Gun will put a nice little hole in you. This will take your head off.
Yeah, and again, it's also, if you have guns in your home, where are they? If you're sitting on the couch watching TV in your living room and your front door is nearby and home invaders bust the door down, do you have a pistol sitting right there to protect you? Most people don't. I'll be honest, I have a pistol in the house, but it's not sitting on my end table or on my coffee table in my living room. I would have to go into another room and retrieve it, and that's the way most people are. But I also don't think that you can go with some of the, again, like you say, I don't want to turn this into a liberal conservative thing, but some of what the liberal pundits say about calling 911, because that's not a bad thing to do, okay, because at least the police are notified, hey, somebody's trying to break into my house, and they can be on their way. But depending on where you live, even in my little town, it could take them 3 to 4 minutes to get here.
Oh, easily.
And so you want to have something there to protect yourself and your family.
Yeah. Well, most of my friends who do have guns, they'll have them locked away in a gun cabinet. They have trigger locks on them. These are things that make these guns ultimately useless in the kind of home invasion scenario that you spun. Me, granted, I've got my swords and stuff in another room, but that's on the wall. I just pop that off the wall. It comes out of the sheath, and that's it. Or, nunchucks or sais or whatever the hell I happen to have at hand. But yeah, I just happen, I've chosen to live in a place where I don't have to worry about that kind of violence. Where I live, a couple of years ago, they had the first murder in the city that had happened in like 20 years, and everybody freaked out because one person in 20 years got killed.
Yeah.
That goes a lot more to protecting myself from violence. Half the time, I don't even lock the doors at night.
Oh, wow.
Whatever. Nobody, I've never been broken into. I leave, I'll go out and I'll leave stuff in the driveway overnight, and it's there in the morning. I don't have to worry about anybody stealing anything. I don't have to worry about anybody breaking in. I've never had my cars damaged. I've never had anything happen. It just sits there.
And I have to say that the few years that I've lived where I'm at right now, I'm going to probably say that there might be, and I may be low here, 1 or 2 murders a year. One, and it may not be every year, but it's rare. It's not like coming from a large city.
Right.
Like we were talking about Chicago or L.A. Or I remember in 1988 I moved to Colorado Springs, Colorado, from Houston, Texas, which is the 4th largest city in the country. And I was sitting in a hotel room watching the local news, trying to figure out what's going on. And this was in December of 88. And they were talking about the amazing amount of gun deaths that had happened in Colorado Springs. Now, at the time, Colorado Springs was about metro area 250,000 people. And there were 12 that year. And I thought, 12? Hell, I think there was 12 last week in Houston.
Yeah.
And, of course, that's awful. 12, but again, it depends on where you live. People freaked out about that there were 12 gun deaths in a year in a city, in a smaller city, but still 12.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about 12, if coming from a big city. But see, I live in a city of, I think, 25,000, and we do 1 gun death every couple of years. I'm not worried. Sorry.
Yeah, I live in a town of almost 50,000. And so I rarely read about it or hear about it. It's surprising to see. Mostly what you see here as far as crime are burglaries. And, of course, I live real close to the border. I can throw a rock almost, it seems like, and across the border. Not really, but it's that close. And drug problems, importation of drugs. And mostly in the newspaper, when you see the sheriff's arrest report or the local cops arrest report, they are drugs and occasionally burglaries.
Right.
But nothing you almost never see. That's why I'm thinking maybe 1 a year.
Yeah, we don't really see a lot of violent crime here either. I'm sure there's plenty of drugs. There is a bad side to the tracks. Actually, literally on the other side of the tracks. But there really isn't anything. There's nothing terribly violent. I know most of the cops in this town. We used to have. We live on a busy street, on a street corner, and they didn't have a stoplight there. So people were running the stop sign, and we used to have a car flipped over in our yard at least once a month. And so we got to know every cop in the damn town because they would be on our doorstep constantly, towing these people out, putting people in ambulances, etc. And they'll tell you, they really don't have a lot of violence to deal with. It's, stopping people from speeding. It's, break-ins, stolen cars, that kind of thing. But you don't have home invasion robberies. You don't have people, throwing you out of your car in the middle of the street. You don't have any of that nonsense. And I think that's just choosing where you live instead of picking the most crime-ridden areas you can possibly think of and then saying, well, now I've got to have a gun to be safe. No, just be smart to begin with.
No, and I agree, and I think that one of the reasons that you would find a high gun ownership where I live is basically because of the illegals, and not mainly the people coming over for work, but the illegals coming over transporting drugs. We've had incidences because where I live, we actually have the feds, the state, the county, and, of course, the local city law enforcement, and they're all involved in this all the time. And that's I think one of the fears is because along the border especially, violence has become unmanageable. Mexico can't manage it. And it's slowly spilling over into the U.S. I don't know what they see at the border, Tijuana and San Diego or whatever that is, whatever's right across from there. But, in Nogales and other places along the border here in Arizona, it's starting to spill over. And you even see it in Texas at Juarez and El Paso, where
right.
I've read in the past year where, in the city hall downtown, they found bullet holes in the city buildings downtown that came from across the border.
Right.
Right there, And so, it's slowly spilling across the border. But I don't really think that, getting back to the basic gun control, is that taking away assault weapons, that's what they call them. All they are high-capacity rifles.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that
are semi-automatic.
Yeah, I always find it funny that they'll sit down and say, we want to take away these high-capacity magazines. So you're actually saying you don't care about the violence. You just want to limit the carnage. You just don't want these crazy people to be able to kill as many people. You don't want to stop the crazy people. You just want to stop how many they can shoot at once.
Well, and you can't do that. And you can't do that because, if you're a nut job and if they limit your magazine capacity and your semi-automatic handgun to 10 rounds, well, you carry a couple of semi-automatic handguns and you carry 5 or 6 magazines.
Yeah, it's easy to swap them out.
It's quick. It takes a second or two at most to swap out. And so is that going to prevent the carnage? I don't think so. People will just start carrying, 5 or 6, the nut jobs again, 10-round magazines.
Yeah, it's not going to stop anybody.
No.
But now that you started talking about that, the other idea that they've been putting forward is, of course, universal background checks. As it stands right now, going to gun shows, things like that, nobody has to have a background check before they're able to buy a weapon.
That's not true. But at least it's not true in Arizona.
Well, it's true in a lot of states.
Okay.
Like
because when you go to a gun show in Arizona, and I've been to a few, is that if I walk up to a vendor, it's usually somebody that owns a store, a brick and mortar store somewhere, okay, and buy a gun, I have to fill out a form, okay, with all my information. And yes, you can lie on that, but they also have a copy of your driver's license, right? Mm-hmm. To show that you're legal, that you can legally buy that. And at the gun show, they take that form, they have an 800 number they call that goes to, I think, the Arizona Bureau of Investigation or whatever, or whatever our state version of the FBI is. And they look you up to see if you have a criminal record and that if you're okay. Now, if you have a concealed carry permit like I do, my fingerprints are on file. I had to do that to get the permit, to actually get the card. They had to do a background check on me to get the card and all that stuff. And so when I go, because I have the card, the only difference is they don't have to make the phone call. But I still have to fill out the form, my name, address, all this information, have I ever been convicted? And if you lie on that form, then, of course, that's a felony. And so, here, there's still a form that you have to fill out. And it doesn't go into any national database, but the vendor is required by the ATF, actually, to keep those forms on file for inspection, because they can walk in any time to your store and say, let me see all your sales of 40 caliber Glocks in the last 3 months, and you better have the documentation there.
Well, that's all well and good for for Arizona or for whatever states that do that, and that's not a bad idea. But the problem is you have to get on the phone, you have to run it through a national or, in your case, a state database, but let's just say the national database. That national database is inherently flawed, especially people who are crazy, because with doctor-patient confidentiality, those people who go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says this person is mentally unstable, this person is going to snap, yada, 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 doctor-patient confidentiality says that information that says this person should not have a firearm doesn't get put into the database. So these people pass the background checks.
Yeah, and that's true, but, and I don't know, again, every state, I don't even know what the law here is in Arizona, but I do know that some states where if you're a psychologist or your psychiatrist, and this has failed in places, it's failed in Colorado with the movie theater shooting.
Right.
And it also failed in Arizona with the Giffords shooting, where these people had problems, were known to have mental problems, and especially the one in Arapahoe, the theater shooting in Colorado, that person was not reported. And there was no law that said you must report this person. But there are some states, what I understand, that do have that law, that if the psychiatrist or psychologist, the therapist, whatever, feels that that person is imminently dangerous, that they have to report them. I can't name the states right now, but because there's been so much about this written, it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
Of every story that I've read in the past several weeks. But apparently there are some states that require that, and maybe that should be a requirement.
But unfortunately, you've got a lot of, and I don't want to call them union, but you've got like psychologist groups who come out and say, we absolutely will never do that, because if our client or, if our patients come in and they know we have to tell the state or they have to report this, they won't be open about their problems.
And that's true, too. And the other part of the slippery slope is, what do they consider mental disease? Like, I remember one article I read, and I was talking with a couple of colleagues at work about this, was that they were considering PTSD as being a mental illness. Now, we have, troops returning from combat, and that they're going to have, maybe not all of them, but some of them are going to have some level of PTSD. Does that make them an immediate danger to the community? No. In my opinion, it doesn't.
Well, the biggest problem, I think, now is that we've taken a lot of things that are actually wrong with people. We've taken a lot of diagnoses, et cetera, and instead of saying there is something wrong with you, we've tried to turn everything into a disease. It's not your fault. It's not your responsibility. You didn't do anything wrong. This is something that is treatable. It's not something that's wrong with you, et cetera. And that's why we're really in a mess, in the mental health industry in this country, because now everything's just a disease that you caught.
And one of the other things they do is they try and medicate people. It's like, I think what you say in the on the site there is a lot of these kids that are involved in these school shootings, these young people, are immediately medicated to some degree.
Well, that's a big problem, and I think that is the one thing that nobody wants to talk about. The school shootings are not caused by guns. They're not caused by the size of magazines. The one thing that if you look at a wide spectrum of these cases that we find in common, the vast majority of these people have been medicated with these psychotropic drugs that are meant to stop depression, they're meant to stop
ADD
and all that. And if you look at the labels on those drugs, they all say, warning, may cause psychotic effects.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And then you wonder why these kids break and go out and shoot people, because you're drugging them with medications that are well known to cause these effects.
Yeah, and I agree. And they over-medicate kids in school now for any little thing. And I think that parents have just gone along with this for too long now. I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I don't think I knew, if I did know anybody that was on any kind of drug like that, it wasn't apparent to me. And this really started coming along, I think, really in the 80s, maybe the late 70s, early 80s, when, they started diagnosing every rambunctious 5-year-old with ADD. What's a rambunctious 5-year-old,
Right.
And maybe it's just a kid being a kid. Maybe it's not, okay, but they started doing that. And so when you're 5 years old and now you're taking these drugs through your teenage years, yeah, exactly. What kind of an effect are they going to have? And that's not trying to say that every kid that takes these psychotropic drugs for ADD, ADHD, whatever, depression, are going to become mass shooters, but you don't know. I mean, there was a time like when I was in overseas in the Middle East, the Army got concerned because they were giving us a drug that we had to take every week for malaria, and it was distributed every week, 1 pill a week. And the Army got concerned because as more information came out about it, they thought there might be some severe side effects for the people taking it, and so they stopped it. And yeah, in fact, actually what happened was the doctors on the ground quit prescribing it, would not prescribe it, and so the DOD had to say, okay, we won't prescribe this. We won't make the people, the soldiers and civilians over there take this drug because they thought there might be some severe side effects, mental side effects to it.
Right.
And so at least they came to that conclusion. Now, again, it didn't mean that everybody that was going to take that specific drug, I think it was called malaproquin or something like that. I can't remember. It's been like 9 years. But that was going to have an effect on them, but they didn't want to take the chance that there was even going to be one soldier that would lose control for whatever reason.
Right. Well, the problem that we've had in the U.S. is, especially as class sizes have gotten bigger, teachers have wanted to medicate the crap out of the students who have been taking up all their time, the students that act up, yell, hyperactive, whatever. And as we've gone, as medical technology has gotten better and we've been able to more effectively diagnose these kids who have problems, the first reaction is drug them. And so we have an entire generation where a large percentage of the kids have been drugged in some way, shape, or form. The other problem is, with the pharmacological industry, they're looking for a way to make money. And so they pushed this idea that being depressed is a bad thing ever. And so they're selling drugs to stop people from being depressed. Well, I'm sorry, but depression is part of life. It's only when it's completely debilitating, when you just can't get up in the morning, that you should be worrying about, about taking something to stop that. But now they want everybody who just feels a little bit bad in the morning or whatever to take something. And all of these drugs have side effects. Yeah. And that's what's leading to these shootings.
Yeah, I think as well. I think a lot of it is, and especially when you hear in the aftermath, especially the recent one, Sandy Hook, where people that knew this guy even slightly said that, yeah, he was a little strange. Well, so what were his problems and why didn't he get help?
Well,
I remember reading initially that and I don't know if this is true because I haven't read any more about it in like a month, is that his mother was at one point going to commit him for therapy.
Right. She told a lot of people that he had problems. She considered him violent and that she needed help. But she never did anything. And beyond not doing anything, all the weapons that he used at Sandy Hook were hers.
Exactly.
And she didn't have them locked up. She didn't have them secured. He just went, picked them up, stuck them in his pants, off to school he went, and bang, bang, bang. Where's the responsibility for this?
And I think it's for the gun owner. For instance, I own some weapons. I have actually a gun safe, a large gun safe sitting in my garage, locked up, okay? And if I need to retrieve a specific weapon, because I like to sports shoot, okay, go to the range. There's a couple of different ranges here I can go to, that I can go and grab what I need, everything that I need, go out to the range for a couple of hours and, plink, as I like to call it, at some targets. And, it's not about getting out aggression or anything. It's just an enjoyable activity for me. But mine are locked up, okay, for the majority. Now, I admitted earlier, I do have one in the house. It's not locked up, but it's in a secure location, okay? It's not sitting out on a table somewhere where anybody could come in and grab it, and use it. But, I think that if that woman had even if nothing else other than gun locks, trigger locks on those weapons, that the chance that shooting would have occurred is probably closer to zero.
Right.
Maybe not 100, maybe not zero, but closer to zero.
Right.
So it's about being responsible, and that comes back to what I was saying about having the right training. I'm sure this woman, and she went out and bought these weapons perfectly legally, is what I've read. Yep. Everything was perfectly fine with her having to own these weapons. But she's not. She apparently was not, because she was one of the people that he killed, of course, not a responsible gun owner. And most responsible gun owners I know, well, every responsible gun owner I know, takes some precaution with their weapons.
Right. But that's another point, that all of these gun laws and all of this gun control legislation that they're trying to put past would not have stopped any of these shootings, because the people who bought the guns passed all the background checks. They were perfectly, I mean, they may not have been responsible, as you said, but these people were completely law-abiding citizens who passed all of the checks, yet somebody else got their hands on the guns, and off they went. Crazies will find a way.
Yeah, and they will. And there was a incident here in my town, I think it was early last year, where a small gun shop was broken into, and some, by criminals, of course, some 20 or 30 weapons were stolen. Now, of course, they caught them within a couple of days, because these guys were really stupid. And they recovered all the weapons, thank goodness, before they could sell them to other criminals. But, those kind of things can happen, too. And it comes down to really securing your weapons, and even gun shop owners need to be more cognizant of that, because I can walk into a gun shop right now. Well, probably not right now; they're closed, or they're getting ready to close. And you see a bunch of rifles, shotguns, whatever, on the wall, and they're not secure, because I could walk in there during the middle of the day and say, "Hey, show me that double-barrel coach gun, shotgun," and I'll just pull it off. Well, I wonder at night if they lock those up anywhere, even though most of the shops that I see have barred windows, barred doors, heavy steel doors, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I want to get in there and I've got a car, I can run right through that and take every gun in the place in 3 minutes, get in a different car, and drive away.
Exactly.
Steal a car, break in. It's not hard.
Exactly. So I wondered sometimes if they secure those at night, because also the ammunition is just sitting out on shelves, so you can get away with weapons possibly and ammunition. But anyway, I think we've covered this.
I think we've exhausted it for the moment.
Yeah, okay.
We can revisit later, but we've had a good discussion on it.
Yeah, I think there is, and please leave us some feedback on this. If you have other points that maybe we should have brought up, your opinion on it, maybe you disagree with us 100%. Hey, that's wonderful. We're really looking for your feedback, your comments on what we discuss. We don't always claim to be correct on everything. Everybody has an opinion. You may have some news some information that we don't have. And so as skeptics, I think that everybody needs to take a close look at their own belief system, especially when they're presented with new evidence. So please, if you have an opinion, leave us some feedback.
Absolutely. All right, let's go ahead and move on.
You believe what?
No. Oh, no.
Okay, our last segment today is You Believe What? And this is going to be a regular segment, and it's going to mainly deal with religion and what we've been dealing with. We've only had one other episode, but everybody always talks about Christianity. And I was telling Cephas that what I really thought we needed to deal with, also were some of the other beliefs from other religions as well, and not just make it seem like we were just bashing Christianity, although they could use a little more bashing occasionally, now and then.
Right.
But, there's other Abrahamic religions out there. One is called Islam. And what we want to deal with today, and again, you'll see some links out on the web page, podcast page, Sharia Law. A lot of people don't know very much about it, and we put a couple of links out there. One of them is actually pretty short. Okay, it's from the Council on Foreign Relations. That's probably the easiest one to read. The other one is 43 pages long, because I tried to print it, and it's from Wikipedia. And if you really want to get into the finer details, which we really don't have time for, but we put that out there for you anyway, in case you want to go through and read some more details about what we are going to be discussing here in our final segment. So, really, what is Sharia law? Basically, Sharia law came in actually after the death of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Probably, a few hundred years it had been developed. It is based on the Quran, the teachings and sayings, and Sharia in Arabic actually means path. And so Sharia guides, supposedly, all aspects of your life, your social life, your cultural life, your religious life, and your legal life, okay? And depending on the country you're in, it depends on how it's enforced. Because there's some more secular governments out there. Let me give a couple of examples. Iraq is a more secular government. Turkey is a more secular Muslim government that want to get along with the West and other countries, of course, and don't really implement, if any, that I have seen anyway, Sharia law. Now, there might be communities within those countries that they implement it, but in general they don't. Whereas in countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Iran, and a place that I've been to a few times, Kuwait, believe it or not, they're fairly harsh on it with Sharia. Now, Kuwait, I would say, is the least harsh, but they still implement parts of Sharia law. And again, basically what it does, it covers pretty much every aspect of your life. It really, again, like I said earlier, it came from the sayings and teachings of Muhammad, some of his followers from later on, some of his disciples, I guess. It became put into something called, the Hadith, which is a literature that grew up around Islam. And so it is, depending on where you live, there's different schools of it, how closely it's followed. For instance, the Hanbali school is probably the most orthodox form of Islam, and it's really embraced. And I forgot to mention Saudi Arabia, where they also use this a lot. Is the Saudi Arabia and, believe it or not, the Taliban. Think about, when we went into Afghanistan, some of the horrors that Western troops and Western people heard about that was going on there. Well, they took a strict view of Sharia law. For instance, women were basically non-people as far as they were concerned. Now, that's not true everywhere.
No, it's not.
But for the Taliban, it was. In fact, for instance, girls couldn't work. Women couldn't work. Women couldn't go to school, no education, and things like that. And as far as culturally, from the religious standpoint, let me go back to religion first. From a religious standpoint, pretty much everything is blasphemy. You can't speak against the prophet. As we were talking about earlier in our news segment, this Christian pastor who was just sentenced to 8 years, had he converted to Christianity while in Iran, not only would he have been charged with blasphemy, which he was convicted of, by the way, and they only gave him jail time, he would have probably been put to death, because in most countries where they view the religion strictly in an orthodox manner, it's the death penalty. There are things that go on in these countries. Let me give a personal example. In Kuwait, I was sitting in a hotel room a few years ago reading the English version of the Kuwait Times. On an inside page, I see a picture of a guy hanging from a gallows. Okay? Drug offenses mean a death penalty by strict Sharia law. And actually, it was a public hanging. And they had a story, and there's a picture, something you would never see in the West. So there's a lot of things going on there that these people believe, and they've been raised like that for over 1,000 years. And so they've been taught these rules and regulations on how to lead their lives from this Hadith teaching.
Right. Unfortunately, it's a little bit... I just wanted to read this. I just found this. This is a quote. This was made by Sheikh. I'm going to completely ruin this name. I'll tell you right now. Don't even tell me. Sheikh Taj el-Din Hilali, who is an Egyptian Muslim. He's the Grand Mufti of Australia and New Zealand. He made this statement regarding Muslim women getting raped. In reference to women being gang raped, he said, "If you take out uncovered meat and place it outside in the street or in the garden or in the park or in the backyard without a cover and the cats come and eat it, whose fault is it? The cats or the uncovered meat? The uncovered meat is the problem. If she was in her room, in her home, in her hijab, no problem would have occurred. In the state of unlawful sexual intercourse, the responsibility falls 90% of the time on the women. Why? Because she possesses the weapon of enticement." This is what Sharia law says.
Yes, and even though still, if the woman is following everything he just said, that she's in her home, in her hajib, right, minding her business, and becomes raped, some intruder, it's still her fault, by the way. The only way that the man can be convicted is by 4 witnesses. Now, not 4 female witnesses, because he could have daughters and sisters or whatever else in the house. 4 male witnesses.
Right. And most of the time those witnesses will not come forward because, hey, they might want to rape somebody later on and they don't want to get involved.
Yeah, and that's true. And there's been some pressure from the West. And again, it comes down to, cultural and societal norms for these people, and really tribal, if you really think about it. Most of these countries didn't really exist that we're talking about, with the exception of probably Turkey, before World War I, in the 20th century, if nobody remembers that one from their history books. And these were a lot of tribes. Saudi Arabia was not a country until after World War I. And it was basically a bunch of tribal chieftains that were always fighting against one another. And they can have different beliefs. They were Shia, Sunni, whatever, right? And Wasabi, which is a sect in Saudi Arabia, and those are the people. The Wasabi sect is the one that won out in Saudi Arabia, the ones the British supported, and they formed these countries. There was no Iran, there was no Iraq, there was no Kuwait, no Emirates. These were formed by Western governments after World War I, and so you have all these tribes that were fighting against one another for centuries, based on different beliefs, that had to come together. Look at Iraq. Who controlled Iraq before the United States went in and kicked Saddam out? It was the Sunnis. They were a minority religion in Iraq. The Shias were the majority, and yet the Sunnis controlled and terrorized the population for over 30 years. So these are a bunch of tribes that tried to become governments
and failed.
And they're still failing all over the world.
The only reason that they have any kind of impact is because they've got the oil, which means they've got a lot of money.
Well, right, and some of them do, and others don't. But there's some of these countries like Pakistan that harbor bad people. Afghanistan did. They allowed the Taliban. Well, actually, we were the cause of that.
Yeah, we were the cause of a lot of things over there.
Because we supported the Mujahideen when they were fighting against the Russians, and we gave them all these weapons, and now, they became the Taliban.
Yeah, unfortunately, the U.S. is very, very good at backing tin pot dictators when they do what we want them to do, and then 10 years later when they say, screw the U.S., we have to go in and take them out. We're very good at that.
Yeah, and again, they have these dual systems in their countries where the government may look secular from the outside, but majority Muslim countries, where that's what we're talking about here, can choose to bring disputes not under like what we have, the Constitution of the United States, a secular document, a secular law, but they can bring it under Sharia law. Any kind of familial disputes, financial disputes, anything. If I'm a Muslim and I live in a majority Muslim country, I can bring, cause against another person, not based on the secular government's laws, which may look very democratic from the outside, and some of them do look very democratic, but I can bring it under Sharia law, which can be very oppressive, depending on what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, but the problem is that even outside of majority Muslim countries, there are a lot of Muslims who are now starting to demand that Muslim matters should always be handled under Sharia law and never under regular secular law.
That's true, and you're seeing that a lot in Europe.
Yeah, Europe.
That's right.
The problem with Europe is so terrified of Muslim violence that they're bending over backwards to pass all these laws that designed to keep the Muslims happy, and all they're doing is they're making all of this violence, they're making all of this hatred legal. So there's no real way to go back and say, well, we're not going to permit this anymore. You've already inherently given them their permission.
Yeah, and exactly. How do you do that? How do you separate in France, for instance? And they have kind of separated it. Remember, just a few years ago, it made the world news basically about all the violence that was going on in the suburbs outside of Paris and other cities, which were in Muslim majority enclaves there, where these people wanted their special rights, and of course France just sort of eventually caved to them.
Well, France is good at caving.
Yeah. And, the same thing, unfortunately, I read all the time is happening in England because, they have English population is like 62 or 63 million people. Well, they have a couple of million Muslims living there. That's, okay, a minority, but it's not insignificant, and these people want their rights to judge their people under their own law. And again, this is a 1,000-year-old or more cultural societal thing that that has developed and changed, just like laws do. Things go to the side, and other things come in over time, but the basics haven't changed of it. And so the fear for a lot of non-Muslims in the West is that there's going to be again a dual system. And how do you for instance, a question, can a Muslim charge me, a non-religious person, for blasphemy in France or England because I say, Islam is a myth?
Yeah.
That would be blasphemy
for
them. Can they charge me for that? And would that be right that they could do that?
Yeah. Well, the one nice thing that we have to remember is that Sharia law will never be a force in America. It completely violates the Constitution up one side and down the other. There is no chance. Muslims make up a very, very tiny percentage of Americans anyway. But even if they were the majority, there's really no way. They would have to completely overturn the Constitution in order to implement Sharia law. So at least we're lucky in that regard. However, if you look at England and look at France, look at a lot of the other European countries, the one thing that they're really having a problem with right now is Muslim honor killings, where they're just deciding, well, this person has brought dishonor upon my family and upon Islam, and therefore I have every right to go out and kill them.
What's happened in the United States?
Oh, it has, but it's very rare. In France, it's like a weekly thing.
Yeah, and it has. And I think the last one that I've heard about was the one that happened several years ago in Dallas, where the father killed his daughter. Right. Because it's
almost always a woman.
Yes. And everyone I've ever read about has been a woman because she's disobeyed him, whatever. So, and again, this is what we're talking about here, Sharia law. Now, again, we're not going to go into every detail about this, and you can read about it on your own if you're interested, but it should be brought up that this is what people in the world believe. And let's talk about this. We're talking about over 2 billion people believe in this in some way or another and follow it to some degree or another.
Well, we're lucky in that if you really look at the breakdown, it's only the most fundamentalist who really push for Sharia law. If you talk to the liberal Muslims, they're very open to say, we have no interest in imposing this on anybody. We think that the way it's done in most of the Muslim countries is wrong. We completely disagree with it. We're fine with the secular system. It's just like with the Christians, it's the fundies that cause the problems.
And that's true, but the fundies seem to get in the news more about it, and but again, there's this religion has over 2 billion followers, and to some degree or another, they're following this. And yeah, there's I think a minority of liberal moderate Muslims, just like there's a minority of liberal Christians that are not going to say go out and stone your son or daughter for disobeying you. And I'm sure there's probably not any that I know of anyway that would agree with that. But it is written in the Bible, and it is a law passed down by quote unquote God. And the difference is that in the West, I think that we're lucky in a way in that we fell to disarray early in the 20th century, early in the current era. Okay, but then knowledge and learning slowly came back, And we were able to push away that, to some degree, this mythology and those laws that were oppressive, because people can talk about that as well. The Inquisition and all the things that happened between the 5th and the 18th century, basically, in the West. Whereas there were some beacons of light in Islam, especially in the peninsula, which we now call Spain, where there was a great amount of learning and tolerance and everything else. But again, the rest of that world, people were uneducated, poor, uneducated, and followed the dictates of their leaders, and they have not progressed as far, in my opinion. I'm not saying that every Muslim is that way. I'm just saying that there are a lot of poor, uneducated people out there that whatever their religious leaders tell them is what they're going to do. And the way they were brought up, that their father and his father and going back generations, what they did is what they do.
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, as I was saying before about honor killings, as these other nations are starting to pass laws that say we're going to respect Sharia law, we're going to allow you guys to judge your own people under Sharia law, all they're really doing is saying, okay, we're going to make honor killings legal and acceptable. So it's a lot harder to prosecute these people for going out and murdering their own family members. Or I've heard of cases where a Muslim man will go out and the girl his son was seeing, he'll go kill her because he doesn't like her and he doesn't like her family. Therefore, where does this stop where we can say, all right, for these kind of cases, you guys can have your own legal system, but for anything beyond this point, you have to deal with us? Where does it stop?
Again, that's what I was asking earlier. Can a Muslim, if Europe allows this to some degree, can a Muslim file charges and prosecute an atheist, in that country for writing a blog post about Islam or, a podcast like we're doing now, a segment in a podcast about Islam that they would consider blasphemy, most likely. Can they do that? Where do you draw the line? And that's the fear with a lot of the countries in the West, is that the governments are going to cave, as you said, and allow them some autonomy, which will throw Europe into chaos.
Europe's got enough chaos as it is.
Yeah. And what they don't really need is, they've got economic chaos, but what they really don't need is religious chaos. Anyway, I guess we've probably beaten that one to death as well.
Oh, well, we can always come back to it later.
Okay. Well,
are we getting ready to wrap up for the week?
Yeah, I think we should. I think it's been a good discussion. I really like the discussion we've had on gun control, especially. And I hope people will listen and pay attention. And again, please give us your feedback. We're really looking forward to your feedback. We're going to try and do these every week, and we'll have different main topics, and we hope, we'll have it posted within a day or so, and it will also be on iTunes. We're already there, so if you want to download and listen to your phone or MP3 player, we'll be there. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Just to let people know what's coming up for next week. So if you have any questions that you'd like us to address, comments on it, etc., sources, whatever. Next week, our main event is going to be skeptics and skepticism. What's the difference between the two? Are atheists automatically skeptics, or are they just skeptical of religion? Then we're going to go into, on You Believe What? We're going to discuss the Catholic dilemma. Recently, the Catholic Church has released 12,000 pages of documentation on 120 pedophile priests that's shown that there is a specific pattern of hiding priests. We're going to talk about what's going on with the Catholic Church and how we can stop it, essentially. Out West has already said that we want your comments, we want your criticisms, we want your concerns, we want your questions. If you like our show, tell somebody. If you don't like our show, tell us. We can't improve our show unless we hear from you. So the links are on our webpage. You can reach us on Twitter. You can reach us. You'll be able to reach us and rate us on iTunes as soon as we get the link up for that. By all means, I want to hear from you.
And thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. We'll see you next week. You've been listening to the Bitchspot Report with your hosts, Cephas and Out West. You can follow us on Twitter by following Bitchspot1 or JEH704. Visit our website at report.jdragononline.com. Tune in again next week for more conservative atheist rants. Thanks for listening.